Hi, Sebastian. Welcome back to Airhacks FM.
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, first, I looked at your blog, and I will steal an idea from you, because I'm working right now on a block engine, and what I thought about is my current block engine is based on Roller, and there is pagination. And the pagination is always painful to implement. And I thought, okay, do I really have to implement that? And I was too lazy. And what I saw in your blog is you have the first 10, the first 10 items, and then you can click on a button and to see them all. And this is a great idea. And by the way, this is what I usually saying about all the pagination patterns. What I always said is don't rely on the pagination. If there's too much on the screen, just ask to refine the query or fetch everything. And this is exactly what you did. And I forgot about my own thing, and I thought about how to implement pagination very effectively. So have you implemented the block by yourself?
Yes, and the reason, or the way how it is implemented right now, is basically just for legacy reasons. It's still using a Java EE application, but it doesn't do much business logic. So potentially I could replace it with like static HTML generator or something. But it works really nicely, and that's fine. And yeah, about the pagination or the fetching, yeah, that's basically mostly the use case that I do. So either I want to see the latest blocks, or if I need some like statistics or how many blocks I wrote in the year or whatever, then I just search for all or get all in the list, and then I search for some titles, or if I want to know whether I wrote something about a specific technology. So this really helps for me, and I don't want to click a lot. So pagination for me is not the best thing, I guess.
My current block implementation actually has both. So the archive, this is very similar to your implementation, where you see all the posts is a static page, which is pre-generated with actually NAS1, so I will port it to Grout. And the other side is a modified. It is slightly extended Roller, and the reason is because I would like to have the statistics, and the new implementation is still going to be Jakarta EE or MicroProfile. There is actually MicroProfile with some Jakarta EE pieces like bean validation. And the reason being is, first, I'm more flexible, and with matrix, I get simple statistics. I will misuse the MicroProfile matrix for stats, which is actually really convenient. And static page generator is fine, but you will still need the Apache web server or something. So for me, it is easier to use Quarkus. It is going to be Quarkus with than static page generator. And I have already some experience with the load. Is not a big deal. It never was. So for this particular case, I don't think these static page generators will provide us, with whatever benefits.
But you do write your blog posts in HTML, right?
I'm writing right now still in HTML, and but very simple semantic HTML. So I think I have 3 or 4 tags. I thought about Markdown, but I think with Visual Studio Code, I'm faster with HTML. Because what I don't like in Markdown is, for instance, the lists. If you write a list in Markdown, you always need a space between. Otherwise, it will this takes too much space. So for me, it is easier to do something like with Visual Studio Code. OL is ordered list, then 5 times li. And then tap, and I'm incredibly fast. So I tried multiple times Markdown. What I do Markdown, I write documentation a lot with Markdown, for instance. But for blog posts, I think you are faster with HTML if you have Emmet and Visual Studio Code. Or in your case, IntelliJ. You know Emmet?
Right, yeah. Yes. I think in IntelliJ, I don't know if it's called Emmet as well, but it's same syntax, like 5 times something and then create with some inner content. You can get really crazy and complex with these queries, but just creating the tags or even closing the tags, that's really helpful.
Okay, cool. And are you writing in Markdown your posts?
Usually in AsciiDoc.
Oh, AsciiDoc. Okay. So you wrote a custom engine which converts AsciiDoc to HTML on the fly?
Yes, I use AsciiDoc.j. Which for multiple reasons is not perfect. I think originally that is the issue because they don't officially still have a grammar or something like that. So how it works is, I think it's still written in Ruby. And if you want to run it on Java, then it's a JRuby and, all these modules and things, which can get quite complicated if you want to run it on an application server or something like that. So in Wi-Fi, for example, that's really challenging. You have to create modules with JRuby and then, this AsciiDoc.j and things like that. I think I even still use the Glassfish or Payera version on my blog, as far as I know. So that works, but it's just, like, it's not super perfect, straightforward. But once you get it running, for me, it was easier to have something where I can write in AsciiDoc then, because actually I write everything in AsciiDoc. I also wrote my book in AsciiDoc, or, even some client invoices and things like that. I had some custom scripts where, you can create all these things. So that's why I usually write in. That's quite easy for me.
Yeah, AsciiDoc is way better than Markdown for lists and tables. So this is actually what I forgot to say, is that actually all the client documentation I wrote was in AsciiDoc. And the reason were tables, basically. Because with Markdown, they are not that great and proprietary, and with AsciiDoc, they are just built in. But AsciiDoc is widely compatible with Markdown, right? So
this is what I like. It's very straightforward. So, you just write a paragraph, you don't think about anything, and it's already valid AsciiDoc. You just write, and then.
How are you storing your posts on your blog posts? Are you storing them in a database?
Yeah, that's interesting. No, actually, I store the AsciiDoc files in Git. Because for me, that's easy, plain text, and you get all the diffs and everything. And then what my application does, it runs all the time, and it uses JGit to access that Git repository to just, listen for some changes. And then it basically compiles the changes on the fly. And I don't quite trust this engine to be super fast. So what I do, I store them just in memory. So they get compiled to HTML once you have new entries, and then they're just being served from the cache. So this is, super fast. And once you start it up, they compile, which takes a few seconds for all the entries, but that's okay.
I actually do exactly the same in most of my projects right now. So my invoicing system stores everything in a file system using JGit, and I use the Quarkus extension. And I can, there is a JGit Quarkus extension, and you can actually compile it natively. So my entire application is a single binary. So I can actually use a server like command line tool. So it opens, loads everything to memory. I can work with it and shut it down. So it's a cool hack, and it worked actually perfectly. So the JGit extension works good. And for my blog post right now, also for the engine, I think I don't have JGit involved yet, but this is nice for documentation purposes, because you can walk through the history and see, okay, what I did when. But it is going to be flat files and stored in JSON. So the content is going to be in JSON as flat files, and it worked with JDK 11 and 14 actually perfectly. Okay, I actually didn't want to talk about block engines right now, but I saw your solution. I was curious how you implement that. And and the hack, I will steal it. That I will show the first 10 and then everything, because I have already the everything. This is my archives block or something. So there's a link from my block engine, and then you will find all the things which are statically generated from a database, basically, because the Roller needs a JDBC database. And this is one of the reasons why I would like to move out from Roller, because the JDBC database are always a little bit hard to back up. And flat files are flat files, right? And I don't need sophisticated queries.
And it's much easier to scale out. You can throw it into, Kubernetes one day if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a funny story anyway, because I also stored the statistics in JDBC database first. It was H2 and the Derby. And then I moved to Hazelcast, and then Infinispan. And so I had already everything in my blog just for fun. And it worked well. So what I also saw in a blog, that you were actually involved with Neo4J, and I just wanted to ask you why. What was the trigger, to write a couple of videos and post Neo4J?
Yeah, that was interesting. So I was involved in a client or a side project in this, which used Neo4J. And actually, just from talking to people, I see that graph databases in general are used more and more because, of big data or machine learning. When you have some, let's say, advanced querying, where you want to get some more insight about your data, how that connects, then a graph database is really, really nice once you get used to this querying model to, access other data rather than just having everything flat or normalized. So this is a quite interesting technology to begin with. And then I was using Neo4j with Quarkus, which is also kind of not experimental, but it's not, perfect yet. So, for example, Spring supports Neo really, really well, but with Quarkus, there's still some things that can be improved. So I was just when I implemented or helped out with that, I was struggling with a few things, and I was like, okay, actually, I should just share some of that, because then if some other folks have the same things, that might be helpful. So, for example, what is there? There is a Quarkus Neo4j kind of extension but it's only, or I say only, the driver or the connecting to the database, like similar like the JDBC. So then you get some health check and, database is running and whatever. But what you want in Neo4j is like similar to JPA. So they have this not ORM, but OGM model that, you can have the same mapping and annotations in your data classes, which is really helpful. So, then a lot of these queries then get already mapped correctly for you. So you don't have to write a lot of like Cypher scripts and a lot of back and forth. And then I said, okay, I definitely want this in Quarkus as well. So that the OGM thing of Neo works with Quarkus. And it does not work in a native mode yet, which is okay for me because actually most of my Quarkus applications run in JVM mode for a bunch of reasons, because, then DevOps engineers are more familiar with how to run a JVM and things like that. And they have this all the structure, and also for throughput reasons, which sometimes might be better in the long run. And
there are actually a couple of reasons not to use the native mode, because first, this is the confusion in larger companies. They ask me, it is no more Java or whatever, so I don't even mention the native mode, because then I say, look, we can just use your JDK, and this is exactly as stable as Whitefly or whatever you had right now. And if you start with the native mode, then people believe, is something a hack. They need specific tooling, which is partially true. Yeah. Then the question rises, but the Graal VM comes from Oracle. What about support? And so this is better, not to even mention the native mode. And you get, 50% memory improvement anyway already. So everyone is going to be happy. And so this is interesting. What I also saw in larger companies, because people get confused with the native mode. They think there's somehow necessary. And monitoring, right? So if you're running in native mode, this is not as easy to connect with Profile, or even not possible. Debug and all the stuff. So native mode is great. For instance, for me, I use native mode all the time for command line tools. So this is my hack. And on the server, I'm not using yet, because with Quarkus, I already saved 50% of memory. So, it's better than enough, and memory is not that. I still don't get, the cost savings factor, because memory gets cheaper and cheaper. So maybe there are some cases, but not in my small world. Another question, you mentioned client. What this means, your client? Is it your freelance client or your IBM client?
In this case, freelance client. So I think I mentioned this before. I still sometimes do like some side work, which actually makes a lot of sense for my developer advocate work, because, you get like more real world view still. And I have like different type of input that I get, which is also really nice and interesting. And just, I just try to balance it from time-wise and to keep the like open view from the whole, what the world needs.
This is actually the perfect combination, because if you end up being, just the developer advocate for IBM, so in one point of time you will lose track, but if you still spend time with a real-world client, which is independent from IBM, I think this is the best IBM can get. You get the real-world experience, in some training, and you can show real world stuff. So I always wondered why this is not a default. The people, the developer advocates or evangelists back then, were not allowed, to provide some services.
Yeah, and it also, really depends what technology you're interested in or what your expertise is, right? Because I always try to keep it on the real world, like what the same technology, what you're using, and I'm not using, like some type of blockchain or scientific, purposes where it's like, okay, this is interesting maybe to do some research or to see, okay, you could do something in like 5 years or whatever, but I really want to do the stuff that actually projects need as of today. And there's a lot to do there just to get something done, which I find the most interesting, because, then it's...
Regarding Neo4j, so why I was so surprised by your Neo4j activity, because Neo4j was very popular on the AirHacks at Munich Airport. There were lots of attendees with Neo4j and questions regarding Neo4j.
Okay,
and now it a little bit dry out. So my opinion is like the peak was like 5 years ago, and now no one mentioned Neo4j again except you. And what we did, we discussed actually a lot Neo4j, and what's funny is just interesting. The Neo4j is actually the architecture, or not the graph databases. This is the graph databases are actually the opposite of document databases. This is the interesting fact, right? So if you have a document database, you don't care about the relations. You care about everything has to be in one place, in one document, which is the best possible case. And in graph databases, you only care about the relations, and the entity themselves are not that important. And there are interesting characteristics. I don't know whether you had the opportunity to look at the scaling. So with Neo4j, scaling is way harder than the document databases, because you have lots, of links between the cluster nodes. And this is where we spend a lot of time discussing that. And this is what I found interesting, that the that the graph databases and the document databases, they have opposite best practices, actually.
Yes. And I also find it really interesting from the, modeling perspective, like how you model your graph. Because especially if we come from an object-oriented or like relational world, then some things really make sense to model them in a certain way where we would not initially think of it. So for example, if you say you write, I don't know, like a task management program where you have a lot of tasks that are sorted by day or something, then you would just say, look, you have a task that has a date or something like that. And in the database, it really makes sense to say, okay, you create a node, which is just the date, like today's date. And then from that, you have relations to all the tasks. Just for the querying model that you say, okay, give me all tasks of that date. And if you have millions of tasks in there, it's super fast to just, take that single date, which is where you have an index. And then you get all the tasks on this, which really makes sense if you think about it. But I would say I had a few of these moments where initially you wouldn't think of it if you come from this other world, where it's like, okay, yeah, now since I am in this database, it really makes sense. Although at first it sounds weird, to have like an entry or a node for something like a date or for something like a type where you think this is not my entity, but then the database really shines.
In relational database, we had in projects sometimes the problem that the relation, I think it was called attributive relations or something like that, where we wanted to put additional metadata on the relation, which is not possible in relational database. And what we always did, we created a entity in between with two relation to the other entities, and we can put additional information on it. I actually forgot what the name was. Like
like an extra table,
yeah. But there was like attributive relations or something. What meant you have relation with additional metadata. But the idea was if you do this, there was always like, for instance, the product was rented from to, and this from to was in between. And if you have lots of such a stuff in relational database, it means with Neo4J or graph databases, it would be a way easier to implement something like this. And whatever we have, as a database, as a join in Neo4J is a first class object. So the joins are actually the entities, and the entities do not matter that much, right? So the data in the entities is not as important as the links. So what I think about, if you would implement a navigation system, then the cities would be the nodes, but the links are the roads, and they are the most important things, because we would have, the attributes like speed probably, and, the congestion or whatever you can imagine on the roads. But city would be probably just, the name and probably population if you would like to display or weather or whatever. Is actually not that relevant to the application, right?
Right. And then if you have some more, sophisticated queries, what I found out at first, if you come from this relational world, you're like, oh my God, this query will be like super complex. Like, give me all cities that match a certain criteria and so on and so forth. And in Neo4J, this can be solved with 2 lines of cipher script, right? When you write like this relational query with these arrows like twice, and then you're like, okay, done. And in SQL, you would write, I don't know, you need a SQL expert with a black belt of, writing database code.
Yeah, exactly.
This is really helpful.
If you have the tables in between, all the queries are going to be really hard, and it's really hard to think. The question now: why you didn't use Neo4J as a backend for your blog? Because just as an experiment, you could use the posts, and all the attributes and tags could be actually the links to the post, right?
Interesting. I actually didn't think of it. Probably you could. I mean, ultimately, it's just a database like any other. The question is if you would have. Like probably if there's the necessity, right?
Yeah,
I
but
would say this is
necessity. What I'm thinking about the visualization. What we could have in such a blog engine is, let's say we have a topic like MicroProfile Quarkus. So you could have a node Quarkus,
the tags, and then
and to them, from the visualization, we could use 3ds or whatever, and then pool the Quarkus, and you will see the links to all the blog posts as nodes, and you can click on them. You could have an experimental
like this cloud visualization.
Yeah. What we had I saw some at the beginning of Java, so they were like you could pull something and it came. So like suspenders and suspending nodes links to the topics just for the visualization could be fun, because you could have dates. With date is not that, but month, for instance, right? So month, then you have links to all the month, then topics, tags,
and some tags, exactly,
and even relations between there will be part one.
Yes, actually, yes, right.
There's different views to the same thing, and even so or videos. You have lots of screencasts and videos. You can have a video tag, all video podcasts. This could be actually great. I don't think about that much because my blog engine is almost done. So right now I'm a little bit overworked, but I will continue. So if I think about this, I will probably rework it with Neo4J. Will never done. So
that'd be nice. Yeah, you could have a look. There's a nice Neo4J browser. Like when you start up the database, maybe you've seen it, so you can like 7474 or something like an admin interface, and it starts up. And this is really nice just to explore. I think that's probably the best feature of the database because, initially if you start out with the Cypher scripts, it's really hard to, like get started, or it takes some learning curve. But the fact that you can just throw some nodes into your database and then you can visualize them in your drag and drop, then it's really visual, like you say, you see all the arrows into nodes. So this is really cool. Neo4J browser, I think it's called. And I'm pretty sure you can use some of these like plugins to connect to your database and just display it for some users, right? Like as a, view only face to say, okay, this is my current view, and you can click and expand and whatever and drag them around. So I think that's pretty cool. Yeah, that's a nice idea.
Yeah. So if we had more time, it's the only problem. We should investigate that. So another thing I found, you were interested in Istio and no more recently. So, and I think it's also dry out a bit. I got lots of questions about Istio, and even I think in one of the IBM conferences, I invited one of them, and someone asked, what is my opinion about API gateways? That was the first one, and the other one was the service meshes. And I always, ask why you would like to know it. So what is your problem or killer use case? And I actually, so far, never got, a proper use case. And then I introduce always my use case. Service meshes are great for distribution of certificates or encryption. Yeah. This is actually, it comes out of the box. But the idea that I'm just using localhost to communicate to other nodes, in my cases, it simply doesn't matter, I have to say. Whether I use your proper name or even the localhost is more confusing because I have to document, which service I would I'm talking to. But if I use, semantic names like ordering, then this is self-documenting. So it's even worse with the localhost. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so I had actually a few projects and few clients or occurrences where I would say it becomes a little bit more mature, or at least I've seen some use cases in real world. But like you say, it's usually like using Istio on top of something existing. So you don't, use it for some crazy complex routing or some discovery or measurements. It's usually, like you say, either certificate or in general to include authorization, like OAuth, which is also supported. And then, you have it everywhere in your cluster, which is quite nice. So then, you configure it via these, I think they're called policies and things like that. So I've seen this where people then used, like some existing Kubernetes infrastructure to say, okay, now let's build this on top of it. Or sometimes actually for traffic management. If you say you have it already, maybe for these purposes, so then it's easier, to do some routing for one or two services where you have to, I don't know, like two different subsets or something of a service. So I don't know about how you see it in your project. I see that it gets a little bit, maybe not mature, mature as well, and also like accepted. So I've seen some projects that actually use it also in a production like setting. And who was specifically asking for some training or support, or hey, how does it work actually? But it's usually very limited use case. So it's like, developers have something existing and most actually don't care. And there's like one or two person in the project who either knows about it or has some half knowledge already, and then says, okay, how can we just do the security point of view or the certificates or OAuth or something? And then it's usually done. So it's like, please include our OpenID Connect or whatever, and then, it's finished, something, or the traffic management. So this is like my view, how I see it. So I think maybe a little bit like Kubernetes was in the beginning.
Yeah, but I mean, the Kubernetes is more or less obvious case, because if you have 10 Docker containers and you will, let's say 10 microservices in a project is not that far off. So if you would like to scale them, you have already 20 and you get the load balancer. So you would need to maintain 30 Docker containers with HR proxy, whatever. And with Kubernetes, you have just, the 10 images, and this basically then it becomes simpler. So this is what I see. With Istio. I think what happened was, Google was behind Kubernetes, and I think also behind Istio, the first service meshes, right? So there was Istio and something else. So what was the Istio, and there was the
Linkerd.
Linkerd was from Uber, right, or from a company?
I think so. Uber or Lyft.
Yeah, Lyft. Linkerd, and they pushed it a lot at the beginning, and people thought, okay, Kubernetes is huge folk is a success, and then. And then we have to, to look at the service meshes as well, because it will come. And what I think what happened is what will happen is that the service meshes, Istio, will just become part of Kubernetes and the platform. So you can just use, Istio as a Kubernetes, a part of Kubernetes without thinking about that. Like, Docker was, the Docker network is just part of the Docker, so you can use it even in production or experimentation, but no one thinks about, the Docker network as a service mesh, which partially is, but this is just, this is also the confusion. So I think it just becomes useful, and there is, and you don't have, to use istio and then find, to search for problems for istio, right? Or problems, solutions for the istio, for the istio, right?
Which really makes sense because, you have to install it and manage it and all these things. And also, like you say, already from OpenShift, I don't know about the current status, but they already support some features from it. So, they basically include Istio. And then, that is just like the natural progress, how I see it, that then, the next step would be that the Kubernetes folks say, okay, we adopt some ideas and make it into the stable mainline branch. And then once it's there, it's like some other things evolved as well, like deployments who came from OpenShift, I think first, the deployment config, and then it gets part of the underlying Kubernetes layer, and then it's great, and that's a good thing because then it's just there. And if you say, okay, if you need security or whatever, you just write another YAML and you're done. That's good.
Cool. And other thing is the monitoring stuff. So people say, okay, this is one of the most common questions regarding monitoring. If they have Istio, should they use Istio in monitoring? You should use Istio for monitoring, or they should use MicroProfile for monitoring, MicroProfile metrics. And this doesn't make any sense for me because, for instance, for the block engine, right? So what I did with the metrics is I had like the content provider, which reads from the files. So I was interested to know how fast it reads from the file. Then the blog post is translated from JSON to HTML. How long does it take? And where do you know syntax errors? Because what I can do, I can provide a wrong template, which causes some errors. Okay. And I would like to see, the number of such errors. And there are two microservices in my blog. One provides the content, which is pluggable, and the other is the render engine. So what I also would like to see the communication between them. And I use open tracing, to see where the time is spent. So with Istio, you can just monitor, the traffic, which is not a lot. So, I mean, this is actually nothing comparing, what we get with open tracing and metrics for free. And I would say the traffic monitoring from Istio is more or less, what the microservices are doing in general. And the MicroProfile metrics is what happens inside a microservice. There's more KPIs and business metrics.
Yeah. Yeah, same. It's like I've seen this from people as well, that they're like, okay, it's already there, so we are done. But I see the other way. It's like a starting point, right? Like it gives you some basic idea. Okay, there's something happening within your cluster, and then you also have the infrastructure there. So what I used a few times is just since the Prometheus or Grafana is then there anyway from Istio, I just misuse or use that to also include some other metrics that are emitted by MicroProfile or by the application in general that then gets scraped as well, and then you can display them as well in a different dashboard or something, and then you have depending what you need, some technical insights or your business metrics, and have some different boards. But for me, it's more like it's a nice helper, it's a nice thing that it's already there, so you don't have to fiddle a lot with like installing and running some components, so you can just use them. But what it's there out of the box, it's like it's more a nice starting ground. It's not like, oh, you're done already. It's just like, okay, you have some metrics that's you see that something is happening, but it probably other than that doesn't help you much from what it means for your application.
Yeah, it's the same as saying, in a monolithic, let's say monolithic, I mean one monolith Jakarta EE application that is enough for monitoring to just having, the web logs from the Apache server to analyze them because there's the entire traffic. But this is, by the way, this is exactly the same, comparison because in Istio you will get the traffic between nodes, and with one just node, and you will just, scrape the log files from Apache, you get also the entire traffic, but it was never enough actually, right?
Right.
What you're doing right now, so what is your main tasks right now? Oh, before we do this, the support from Quarkus. So actually, what I don't got is the OGM. So the Neo4J OGM. You could just use the library without any extension from Quarkus, and it will work not in developer mode, but it would just work out of the box. So it would work as on Whitefly or on Tomcat, right? So there is no difference.
It does, yes. Actually, there were two things. Now it does work in developer mode as well, which is really cool. So that, it's super good for the developer experience. It did not work in the past, like now that has been fixed like a few features ago, a few releases ago, because of some class loading issue. Because, the class loading in Quarkus, I forgot the name, they use like some library or some stuff, and it collided with what the OGM model does, how it looks up its models from the classes, from your class files.
Oh, okay.
But now that's been fixed. So now this works both in production mode and development mode, which is really good. And then, if folks are interested, you can look at that article that I wrote, like how to do Neo4J on Quarkus. And, because of the settings that you do. And then you need to take care how to build up Yes, you unfortunately still that's another thing. It's not a big deal, but you have to open and close your own transactions because that is not supported yet. Like JPA with or the JTA transactional annotation, or in Spring same. So you kind of have to like typically a one class or something where just do all your business logic entry points, and then they are wrapped in some Java Lambda or something where you then always safely include this within a transaction. So you just have to manage them yourself, like similar like user transaction.
But you could write an extension for that. This would be trivial. An extension for that.
Yeah, so I thought about it. In the Quarkus world, as far as I understood it, folks want all the extensions to work on native mode.
Yes.
So, in order to get accepted, or to get part of the ecosystem, which makes sense. But then I think from the OGM model, the tricky part is how to look up the classes, like Panache is doing it. So you would have to do more work so that all of it gets basically, I guess, stored in a native friendly way or something with compatible with Graal. And I think this is the blocker why there is not a real blocker, but that is more work that is required in order to get that OGM module.
Yeah, but forget about the Graal VM. So you could write your own extension. And and this would be because you could hook into JTA and know when the transaction is started and committed. And then you only will need, the counterpart of, you will have to look up the context from Neo4J and say, begin or commit. So this was basically everything.
Right.
Like an interceptor, or interceptor would be the same.
Yes, and actually, since you started to ask what I'm doing right now, so one tiny thing that I had for Quarkus, I found, I would say, from my EE view, it's a bug. It's more like there were two bean validation and the other one JSON-B. For validators and JSON-B type adapters, you could not inject CDI beans because they were not, noticed as beans. You could annotate them with application scope, with some scope, like the validator itself or the type adapter. But, in EE, that was not required, right? It simply worked out of the box. And you could say, I think it's even mentioned in the spec that if you have a validator or something and you have a CDI support on your runtime, then it has to work. It has to provide both. And in Quarkus, it doesn't do it yet because I think it's one of these unremovable things where it gets just shaken out at build time if it's not detected because it's not known as a bean or something like that. And I submitted this as an issue, and then it was like similar thing for bean validation and JSON-B, and then the guys just wrote, hey, why not provide something there? It's kind of like trivial. Actually, I never wrote a Quarkus extension or these. I think that's the build time phase like extension or transformers or processors basically. And then what you say with transactions is actually the same.
Recorders, I think, right? Those are the recorders.
Yeah, something like this. Yes. And then this would happen at build time as well. So you basically, you can rewrite your classes or say, okay, please put some extra scopes on it, or interceptors or whatever. And then what I would do, actually, that's a nice idea, to look into it, how it works, and to look at. I would start maybe with Panache or with the JPA model, how basically the JTA transactions are done, and then build something similar where I say, okay, you introduce your own transactional annotation, and then try to process this in this extra build time scanner.
You could even create a generic one, because what you could do is you could produce the context, and the context you would just require no begin and commit and rollback, and then in the extension just rely on that, for instance, right? And say, okay, if something has the transactional interface, I can just handle that, and this could be Neo4J or something else.
Oh, you mean that it's supported? Oh, that's a good point. It would be kind of. I don't know if it's kind of like it's very pragmatic. I like this approach that you basically, like you say, you reuse the same annotation, right?
Yeah.
It's probably not efficiently JTA, right? Because it has like more what's it called, transaction phases and things like that. So I don't know if that's fully compatible with what Neo does, but in general, just for the
this was my first idea, which I didn't. Which I didn't actually say loudly. The next one was if you have in your code something, just a method which produces transaction context. And this transaction context is either your annotation interface, and you or something where there are three methods like begin, commit, and rollback. And this you can use in your extension, just to say begin, and then
there's something like a generic transaction
as to start with. This could actually work because the extension has two pieces, like the runtime and the build time, and you could do this in the runtime, and in the build time you can rely on it, for instance, right? You mentioned several times Spring, so you do a lot of Spring with Spring?
Actually not. What most people don't know, I have done a lot of Spring in the past, but that's now a few years ago. And actually, sometimes, rarely, when some client asks me, I do, show some Spring. So, for example, I had some workshops on microservice architectures or some data CQRS in general, where it was more about, the architectural part. And then if they ask like, hey, by the way, we use Spring, like, could you do some examples in Spring? And I say, yeah, of course, right? Because then they're familiar with this, so it does not make sense to introduce my own stuff or something else. But mostly or almost exclusively for the stuff I do myself, I use, like either Java EE or MicroProfile or then some Quarkus specific things or plain Java. I mentioned Spring a few times because with Neo4J, I know that the folks are very involved with Spring. So, the Spring support with Neo is really, really good. Mm-hmm. And then, it's basically just a pointer to there if probably people are interested in it. I think it makes sense to look at, the Spring support of Neo first, like transactional or, the data model or how it integrates. And then look at that. I think isn't it Spring SDN, like data network? I forgot the name, but something like this. So that's why I mentioned it. But for me, it's mostly, like on the still enterprise Java side of things.
When you did Spring, before we met the first time or after that?
I would say like during, because your air hacks and a few other things were basically the reason why I looked into Java EE. So that was Java 5, Java 6. And I was like, okay, this looks really cool. And initially, I liked it a lot, mostly because of the configuration part that you did not need to configure anything, right? Like what I mentioned before with JSONB and CDI or bean validation, it just works, right? You can cross-use like some annotations. And mostly also because of CDI, because the CDI, especially scopes and producers, that's really powerful, and I like that a lot. And this is then why I kind of like switched technologies a little bit. So I was heavily involved. It's now many years ago in some Spring projects where it was like usually Spring on, I don't remember which version, but Spring on Tomcat before Spring Boot was a thing, or while this was just being starting up. And then I basically kind of like switched the technology view a bit. But I guess once, I see the important things is just that you understand the concepts, right? Like how all of that works and how it works in like from conceptual point of view. And then it's very similar, right? Like if you call it at AutoWide or at service or,
this is
our application scope. I
actually did 3 or 2 Spring projects by accident, and not projects. And what happened was the client asked me, can you review code for us? Is this Java E code, of course. And this was Spring, and they didn't knew that this is Spring. Okay. Yeah. And I did the review, and it was actually pretty good project. So I was actually impressed with the clarity of the code. They were good developers, but it was still a little bit more code than I would actually. And this was more, expert knowledge required. They had far more annotations, where for me the reason was not obvious. And then I told them this, and they said, okay, what you are doing usually is, okay, I'm using Java E actually, or the MicroProfile, and show them MicroProfile, and they thought, okay, this is actually really simple and nice. So therefore I asked you, why you mentioned.
Were they switching then the technology?
In some projects, yes. Also, I get actually a lots of requests. I'm still waiting for one client who would like to switch to right now, of course, Quarkus, because it's hype, but I just use the hype, so whatever. And regarding Quarkus, what happens right now, even there was one survey in the JAX, the German JAX conference. Yeah. And this was like, what is the most popular framework? And the first was Spring Boot, I think. Then came, I think Spring Boot were both. And then it was interesting. Then came Quarkus, Jakarta EE, and MicroProfile. And I thought, okay, how you can do Quarkus without Jakarta EE or MicroProfile? I mean, what are you doing? Is this Quarkus just vertex? Or I mean, this is like, because Quarkus, you have 250 extensions or even more. And I think it would be possible to use Quarkus without MicroProfile and Jakarta EE, but it is really hard. So what you will have to do is you will need to know just your reactive routes with vertex. So they are expert applications which are doing just that. But for me,
the question, it doesn't make sense.
Absolutely unproductive. So when I use Quarkus, in all cases, I always use entire MicroProfile. So maybe JSON Web Token not, because there is no authentication, whatever. And what it already means, I already have 20-30% of Jakarta EE, because I always need CDI, JAX-RS, JSONB, and JSONP. So I already have a huge amount of things. And in Quarkus, I don't need EJB. So I use request, scope, and transactional, my own annotation. So I use a stereotype, which is almost my stateless. And sometimes we use bean validations, servlets, for instance, from Java EE. So I would say it is almost impossible to do a reasonable application in our way, simple code and so forth, with Quarkus and without MicroProfile and Jakarta. But the cool story is, if you would combine from the survey Quarkus, MicroProfile, and Jakarta EE, it will be number one. So and this is what I never understood is the distinction. And for me, is Quarkus not that different to Whitefly? So it's actually the reason why also in many projects people would like to migrate to Quarkus just for fun. They are bored, with whatever they had, and they say, okay, we do something new. Okay, they go to Quarkus, and there's almost nothing to do, but they feel better. Then who cares? So I think Quarkus is really important in this regard because it, there's some fresh air. Nothing really changed, but it's a little bit, faster and so forth.
Yeah, I'm really happy about that as well, and especially the build time optimization. That's the real killer feature for the resource consumption, and that it gets just really fast.
Yeah, but the build time optimization, I mean, the build and deployment itself is not a lot of faster than Whitefly. I would say it would probably save every time 1 second. But
you mean if you combine it, like if you count the times, like for both?
How long does it take to deploy the application to see results on the screen if you're developing? This is the important metric for me.
Yeah, that's interesting because I usually, when it comes to developer productivity, I count not necessarily the whole time, but I count a lot like the startup from scratch, from zero, if you have a built application. So once it is built already, right, like your Docker image and then start a Docker container, how long does that take? And the second that I count is how long does it take to have not the whole time, but the development turnaround, right? So once you start it up once, and then I'm coding and, code save and refresh, how long does that take? And then it helps to have these development modes, like, in Quarkus or in OpenLiberty, and they are super fast to say, okay, it takes like 3, 4, or 5 seconds to start it up initially, but then it's within 1 second to just save and refresh.
Yeah.
And that's, for me, that's the killer feature because I only have to wait for the 5 seconds once, and then, I don't care anymore.
Yeah, but with what, for instance, Watch and Deploy was similar experience. The only problem is I have to migrate the Maven embedded to Java 11 or 14. It throws some warning, which I hate. But this is the Maven fault. I will probably rebuild it by myself. But it's also a very similar experience. So it's not like there's a huge difference if the project gets larger. But still, Quarkus is faster. So it's not like you have to stick with Jakarta EE servers because of speed. So Quarkus is still faster, but it's not a huge difference. And there are some clients where I show them, because what happens usually, if the first 5 minutes they ask me, show us something new. So the clients, met them every 2-3 years, and they have some challenges. We met again, and we discuss, architecture, whatever. And the first question is, show us something new. So I show Quarkus, and they say, okay, nice, though. And some say, okay, but our Whitefly or Payara is fast enough. The turnaround cycles, it's not worth to do this. What else is okay? You can save memory, and there are extensions, and the documentation is nice, and the MicroProfile configuration is actually great. And some are switching, and some are not switching, which is also a good sign, because it means, what we did was not that crazy.
And it's good enough and pragmatic, and it solves the problem, and that's probably the most important thing, to say, okay, you don't have to do something new just for the sake of doing something new.
Yeah, and as there's a podcast with Frank Del Porta, and what he did, this is a Raspberry Pi guy, and he approached me and said, could you please, I would like to talk on your podcast about Raspberry Pi. I was like, why not? Cool. And he was a Spring guy, and he asked me about my opinion. Say, hey, look, I have no idea about Spring, so this is what I could actually look at your code. But what you can do, just port your application on Raspberry Pi to Quarkus, and then we can talk a little bit more, because I have more experience with Quarkus. And he did it, and he was actually delighted. I said, hey, this is like Spring, and he posted the stats, and it started like 3 times faster than Spring Boot on Raspberry. And this was not the native mode; it was Java mode.
Okay, nice.
So and he posted the thing, and now interesting. The reactions were interesting, because someone on Twitter said, "Who cares to know about view seconds optimizations?" But the difference was like 30 seconds and 10 seconds. And I say, this is actually funny, because we had the argument. Yeah, but we had the arguments. Jakarta is bloated and slow, and now Quarkus is so fast, and we get now the arguments. It doesn't have to be that fast, or who cares about the seconds, or who cares about the view max, right? And this was, as I started with Java, it was Java was slow, and then was Java really fast. So we got the arguments. Who cares about that? You just use Scala or Groovy or whatever. And even if lose some seconds, no one cares, because Java is a system language, way too low level. You remember the arguments back then? I never heard it again. Yeah. Like, Java is low level system language, and you should use something more higher level, even if it's slower, right? So this is always, funny argumentation. What would be cool, to capture the arguments in the time, like, a way back machine, and then, just reply that every 10 years and see that we are actually, it's already solved, and now you criticize the other parts, which will be solved in the next 10 years as we're moving back and forth, actually.
Exactly. Yeah, I also see, the same things, like either people are on the camp where it's like, okay, we need super crazy performance, and then they complain that it's not fast enough, which actually is not true anymore, thanks to hotspot and optimizations and JVMs. Or it's to say, okay, I want more, like high level, and I want to do is like something alternative JVM languages, Scala or Node.js, and who cares about that performance? Which is also not true, because it does make a difference, at least when we talk about seconds and for the development experience. And I think for that, Java is in a really, really good, if almost perfect situation of, like in between, that you actually can have both. It's like really performant, but also, the language is on a, I think, really nice abstraction layer. It's not like, it's low level or anything, right? You can really write readable code, and, it's really, really productive. So that's why I still use it.
Yeah, and this is more and more fun, I have to say. Now with JDK 11 and 14, we get lots of features which are actually really usable. And with Visual Studio Code, I know you're an IntelliJ guy, but with Visual Studio Code is getting, similar experience like JavaScript. I just, open Visual Studio Code, hack something, close it, and it works better and better. So I'm really actually more and more fascinated by Java after 25 years, which is crazy. So last questions regarding Kubernetes. So do you see that someone is running Kubernetes plain? I mean, they built everything from scratch and just using Kubernetes as Kubernetes?
Not in projects.
Yeah.
Not not in production like projects, just for the sake of maintainability. And
so
what I see is plain Kubernetes, like without OpenShift, like that happens. Like actually, it's mostly OpenShift. What I see in
exactly.
commercial projects. But also it happens sometimes that I see like some plain Kubernetes, but then it's, I think, almost exclusively even the managed option. Like not just, like some engineers setting it up themselves, but basically using, like some cloud environment or some other provider who does all that stuff for them. And then you only have to sometimes manage nodes and say, okay, upgrade now version, and then that's it basically. Which I think also makes sense, because
so they use something like EKS or something from Amazon, right?
Yeah,
Elastic Kubernetes Service, or the Google Kubernetes
or
engine,
Google or IBM Cloud, or like all of them now have managed Kubernetes.
IBM Cloud. If I use IBM Cloud, so what's the name of the Kubernetes installation? You know that?
It's IKS, IBM Cloud Kubernetes Service.
And what you get with it?
It's basically managed Kubernetes. In this, actually, you can have multiple things. So it's really interesting that now I think the most like commercial contributors, or who are backed by a company, come from IBM now for Kubernetes.
Oh, no more Red Hat? No, Red Hat combined with IBM, or just IBM?
I think it was just IBM for the main, like just Kubernetes, not the.
This is cool, because Red Hat was second. If you say IBM is now second, even better, because IBM and Red Hat combined are probably first.
Double, yeah, I guess.
This is the question. You should investigate that, whether the IBM committers are also Red Hat included or not, because Red Hat was always second on Kubernetes. Okay, cool.
Yeah, makes sense. And what you get, they're actually also the fastest in, adopting new versions. So once there's a new Kubernetes version, I mean, now, there's so much included, so most people, as I see, don't care anymore, right? So we have all the features that we need for normal enterprise projects. At some point, it was interesting for, to get init containers or whatever, but that has been done a while ago. But they're the fastest in getting new Kubernetes versions. And then, you can have some additional features, like, you get some like some monitoring board that pop up out of the box, like if you don't use Istio, or you can have a managed Istio as well. Or now it also supports managed OpenShift. So you can actually get like OpenShift clusters, like the managed one from the IBM Cloud version.
Okay. And if you're running the managed IBM Kubernetes service, the load balancer is included, the ingress, or you can decide, or
you can also decide out of the box. It comes with it's called ALB, automatic load balancer or something, which sets up some random domain, which then you can use. But of course, there's some tutorials how to use Nginx, or I actually mostly use Istio. Not necessarily because I need it, but I've done a few presentations, and now I just have some automation scripts to say, okay, create a new cluster and install Istio, and then it works in a few minutes, and that's perfect for me. And then I know everything is included, and I can just access it, and it works.
And Docker,
that's really nice.
Docker registry, it also ships with own Docker registry, or you have to is a separate service, or what's the story with Docker?
You get a Docker registry as well, but of course you can. I actually mostly use Docker Hub because it's also accessible for. Well, actually, it would not matter. I just started with Docker Hub, and that's the reason, I think. But yeah, you can use its ICR, .io. That's the short version of of the registry.
Because I think in Amazon case, you have to, book the Docker registry service, private Docker registry, and then you can have the Docker, Elastic Container Service, ECS or AKS. Okay. And in Oracle case was actually nicer because you got everything at once. So you got, the Docker and the Docker service and the Docker registry was in one thing. So my question was if you use IBM's EKS or Elastic IBM service, IBM Kubernetes service. This is the IKS, yes. Whether you got, the Docker registry out of the box, or you have to book another IBM service, which is the Docker registry. You know that?
Yes. So technically it is another service, but if you do the cloud sign up, it's just it's the same command line interface. It's called IBM Cloud, and it's like it's the same look and feel. Okay, cool. So I think technically it's a different service, but who cares? It's just like another registry, and that's also publicly available. It's like Docker Hub, just hosted by IBM, and then it includes with your Kubernetes cluster if you're the same user and the same. I think they're also called namespaces or something, and then you just it just works, which is really nice, right? So if you want to use that, then it's just there, or of course, if you have your own private server or Docker Hub, that's of course that always works as well.
Okay, perfect. So
yeah, what I wanted to ask you actually about Java. So have you had a chance to look into openJ9, like an alternative JDK, or did you use it sometimes?
Yeah, I use sometimes, and it's faster. So it is a little bit faster. So I like that. I used recently a lot of the stock openJDK because it's, this is the base. But I like actually the J9, and I thought about using a little bit more. The only problem is people would probably think that I'm using some proprietary J9 features. So I try to avoid it because of the experience with Quarkus and Graal VM. So if they already see that I use by accident the Graal VM, which in Java mode they already suspect Quarkus is that fast because of some magic. So what I tend to do is stock JDKs in all my presentations, and then they see that is the worst possible experience, and they always can optimize that. But I was pleasantly surprised with the openJ9, and this is also easily accessible, so you can just download and just use it. And I will experiment more on my block engine. I will probably try it with the J9, and as well on Docklands. I will put alternative image with J9 and see then out of the box I have the direct comparison. But for my public, hacks on YouTube, I try to use the base JDK, so there are no questions left because you get, it has to be simple and obvious. And if I try, to tweak too much, so I don't know whether you know. Back then I had a Windows machine, Windows Vista, before I had Mac, or like a 2008 or whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Not XP or 7, but
I started with. It was 2000, and then had everything on Windows, and then my IBM ThinkPad broke. And I couldn't get a replacement, so I bought the Mac. This is the story. But before then, I use a lot of presentation with my Windows, and people suspect me that I have like a magical machine because it was so fast. And the reason was I just, my applications were so small and thin, and it was that fast. So this is the same. So if I would back then use JRebel or whatever, they would say, okay, this is so fast because I'm using JRebel, but I used nothing. Right. So there were no arguments left. So this is the reason. But I think J9 is one of the nicest, I would say. And this is highly optimized. I know that because they work a lot on that already. And it was, I think, backported even from the other mainframes and everything. So it's highly optimized JVM from IBM.
Yes, and it's interesting what you said about Quarkus, because I actually I use it for like the opposite reason. I use it with Quarkus to show, okay, Quarkus is not just about native. You can even swap it, the JVM. It is just Java, right? So it doesn't matter if you run it with OpenJDK. It's not also married to OpenJDK. You can, it's just it runs on Java, and then whatever you do, and I use OpenJ9 because it's faster. And Nicholas, you interviewed him in the past. Yes, he wrote just like some small comparison blog post with some numbers of Quarkus. And it's interesting to see, if you have on the website, they have like the native mode and then the JVM mode. And actually the OpenJ9 mode is like in the middle. So if you just don't do anything else, you just swap the JVM, you already get like half of the memory footprint compared to OpenJDK.
Cool.
Which I think is for me, that's kind of like the best of both worlds, because it's, it doesn't change anything from a JVA perspective. What we talked about before, you get all the, Quarkus like advantages to run it on a JVM mode, but still you get a little bit more of consumption of saving which doesn't involve another some other effort because you literally just swap the JVM.
Yeah, this is actually good to know. So I will, if you can provide me the link, or I will look it up in Niklas' blog and put it to the show notes, because this could be a great option for actual my commercial projects. Because then it doesn't matter, right? We use whatever is fast. And
exactly.
And I have some clients with Red Hat background, so it would be easy to convince them to use IBM because it is almost the same company. And so this is, and some numbers are always good. I just saw that it's faster, but I didn't have any formal comparison.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, so what I did, I swapped my like normal Java on which I run all of my like hacky projects and everything to openJ9, and I never had like any issues. I mean, I mostly don't even noticed or whatever, and now it's just running on openJ9. Like if I run Java or Java C on the command line, that's the J9 perspective, and then just works. And I know it saves me some resources, but whatever.
So anything else you would like to mention, your blog or whatever? So your work blog.
Not really. What else I do right now is basically that, just creating some more content. I do a lot of on Quarkus on the moment, and then just enterprise stuff in general. I do a little bit more of developer productivity, also where I interviewed you for my podcast. So I think that's just an interesting topic. That's what I spend a little bit of time on. And other than that, that's just continuing to do interesting stuff and
so what's
projects.
Your links, Twitter, blog, and whatever?
Yeah, Twitter is Dashner S, which is the confusing part because last name first, Dashner and S. And then my website is also linked there. It's sebastian-dashner.com. And there you find everything, like from blog and newsletter and whatever. And also Twitter, I usually just cross-post everything. That is a good entry point to find me.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So I will re-invite you back and talk, about your clients, because it's always, interesting for me to think and see what the others are doing. And thank you. And have fun.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Bye.